Hi there, everybody. Thank you. Little sort of brief introduction from me. So, my name is Robert Mandelstam. I'm a welfare benefits advisor. I work for Maggie's Cancer Charity, my full-time job. Some of you may have heard of the organisation. We're a cancer charity, providing a range of support to the cancer community, and my role is obviously the benefits side of things. And yeah, I do some consultancy work for the Better Together project. And yeah, it's great to be here this evening. Yeah, as Vicky said, thank you for taking time out of your evening to spend some time with us. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to share my screen and load up the presentation. Cool. Everybody got that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Brilliant.
Yeah, looks
so,
good.
Brill. Cool. So let's get cracking. So, benefits are sort of categorized into different categories. So we have means tested benefits, non-means tested benefits, contributory based benefits, and then sort of benefits that are administered locally by local authorities. And we're going to look at each one of these sort of components in isolation and how they sort of all fit together in the benefits jigsaw. So we'll start with means tested benefits. Some of you may be aware of universal credit, and we're gonna look at universal credit in quite a bit of depth here. So in a nutshell, universal credit is a means tested benefit, which is a top-up benefit ensuring that people in sort of circumstances don't see their income drop before a certain level. And universal credit is made up of different elements to sort of acknowledge that fact, and we'll have a look in a while how universal credit is made up to people's kind of unique circumstances. A common misconception out there is that universal credit is only for people out of work. That's not true at all. There are plenty of cases where people can claim universal credit in work to top up their income if they're on a low income, if they have families, if they have rent, that sort of thing. But again, we'll have a look at that in a little while. Universal credit can be claimed alongside the other categories of benefits that we've mentioned. So you can claim a means tested benefit alongside a non-means tested benefit and a contributory benefit and a locally sort of administered benefit. Again, universal credit, as some of you may know, is replacing 6 what we call legacy-based benefits. So benefits like housing benefit, income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment and support allowance, income support, and tax credits. We are well and truly in the migration sort of process. Some of you maybe have experience of that process, and we can have a chat about that a bit later on. So basic qualifying conditions for universal credit need to be of working age. Typically 18 to 67, 16 in some circumstances, but we don't need to concern ourselves with that for now. You need to have a right to reside in the UK. So for those that are EEA nationals, either settled status, pre-settled status. For those that are non-EU nationals, indefinite leave to remain or British citizenship. Have a low income, which there's no sort of definitive answer as to what a low income is. It depends on individual circumstances, but certainly savings need to be less than 16,000. Okay, so the different components of universal credit are listed here. So this is the sort of first stage of working out somebody's entitlement to universal credit. So first of all, we look at what's called the standard allowance. So this looks at whether the claimants are a single or in a couple, living with a partner, that sort of thing. And then the next one is to look at whether there's any child dependents living in the property. That's now capped to 2 children as of 2017. So any subsequent children born after April 2017, you can only claim for 2 children. Any children born before that date, you can still claim as appropriate. And then we have the housing element, which is the equivalent of housing benefit, so help with any rent that somebody may have. And then we have what's called the limited capability for work elements. And this is something that we're going to have a look at a little in more depth a little bit later on in the presentation. This is basically an additional amount that can be added onto your award if your health condition prevents you from working or sort of limits the sort of work that you can do. Then we have the disabled child element. So any children, dependent children in receipt of disability benefits, there's an additional amount that can be added to universal credit. Then we have a carer element. So if somebody's providing care for somebody in receipt of a disability benefit, that can be acknowledged in universal credit. And then also childcare costs. So yeah, if somebody's working and needs help with sort of childcare, the universal credit system can provide some support with that as well. But that's the basic sort of structure of a universal credit claim, and that can be tailored to everybody's circumstances as needed. Okay, so once we make a claim for universal credit, and we'll have a look at that again in a bit later on, this is an example of what a universal credit statement would look like. So as you can see, we have the standard allowance. So this person is single, so they get the single person's rate. They get some support with their rent. You can see here there's a slight shortfall because they're affected by bedroom tax. So their housing element is capped by 14%. And this person is getting the limited capability for work-related activity. So they have a health condition which prevents them from working. So we can see how that all adds up, and that is this person's universal credit entitlement for this particular month. Can get more complicated, but this is a nice simple sort of graphic just to explain how that works. Okay, so how to apply for universal credit. So universal credit is digital by default, so you need to make a claim online. There is help available with that. There's the help to claim service through local citizens advice bureaus. So if anybody is required to make a claim for universal credit and there is sort of an issue sort of digitally, or there's lack of internet connection, there's certainly support out there to help make that claim. Basic information you would need to make a claim at the outset. Household composition, so married, single, living with a partner, any children, any rent, any other income coming in, any benefits, and any information that may be available on any health conditions that you have. There's a link here if anybody wants to have a mess around online with a dummy claim for universal credit, just there for your information. Okay, so we'll have a look now at the managed migration. Again, this is something that some of you may be aware of, you may have had experience of, but I thought that as it's sort of a topical issue at this moment in time, it would be very good to sort of bring it up in this presentation. So what's happening at the moment and has been going on now for the last couple of years is people on the old style benefits, like income-related employment and support allowance, like housing benefit, like tax credits, are currently being moved over onto universal credit because these claims are now closed. You can't make a new claim for these benefits. So if you do need to make a claim for a means tested benefit, universal credit would be the sort of benefit that you would need to look at. So what would be happening with the managed migration? So what I should say, there are two types of migration. There's managed migration, which is really what we're going to focus on tonight, which is where the DWP are sort of inviting people to make a claim for universal credit. And there's also the natural migration, where a change in somebody's individual circumstances necessitates making a claim for universal credit. But for the purposes of tonight, we're going to just look at managed migration. So what should happen when the DWP wants somebody to make a claim for universal credit? They should receive a letter in the post informing them that they need to make a claim for universal credit by a certain date. Otherwise, all of their sort of legacy benefits would be cut off if they don't do it by that particular date. And you have 3 months to do that, and the date will be sort of very clear in the letter. And if the claim is made within that time frame, providing there are no other sort of changes in circumstances, there's what's called transitional protection, which means people won't be any worse off at the point of transfer. And we'll have a look at that in a bit more a bit later on. So this is an example of a universal credit migration letter. So we can see that universal credit is replacing your working tax credits. You have until this date to make the claim. Yeah, So that's sort of a standard letter. So this is the current timetable. So as of April last year, universal credit migration was happening to anybody receiving income support with housing benefit and tax credits with housing benefit. As of June last year, anybody in receipt of just housing benefit was invited over. As of July last year, claimants receiving employment and support allowance with child tax credits. In August, that was expanded to claimants receiving tax credits and over pension age. And as of September, really opened up to everyone. And it's anticipated that this will be finished by March next year, although that remains to be seen whether that's going to be stuck to or not. So these are my sort of top tips for managing the managed migration process. So if you are unable to make the claim within the first 3-month time frame, you can contact Universal Credit to ask for an extension. Typically, that is a month. And if you do that, you won't lose the transitional protection that you may be entitled to. So in effect, you won't be any worse off by missing the initial deadline. If you make a claim for another benefit before migration, such as personal independence payment or DLA, that may sort of add an additional amount to a legacy benefit, that can then be added to your transitional protection in your universal credit claim. So kind of you won't be any worse off where you could have been better off under old benefits, if that makes any sense. And I'll try and explain that with an example in a minute. Yeah, okay. So this is an example where somebody there's a change in somebody's circumstances, they make a claim for PIP, and then they're sort of invited to make a claim for universal credit and how this could work for them. So Maria is a single parent working 16 hours a week and is currently receiving working tax credits of £62 a week. And she's received her universal credit migration notice. Since moving over onto universal credit, she made a claim for PIP a few months ago, and this has been decided and backdated to the date that she made the claim while she was still receiving working tax credits. So because of that, she's now entitled to an additional amount of her working tax credits, the disability element, which increases her award from tax credits from £62 a week to 137. These are just these figures aren't exact, by the way, so don't quote them. So the difference of £75 a week can be backdated to the time that she was on tax credits, and then added to her universal credit transitional protection. So this won't happen, or if this sort of scenario was to happen, it wouldn't happen automatically. You would need to ask for what's called an anytime revision to get that added on. And that's the relevant sort of provision under the kind of regulations to do that. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So some other key points about universal credit migration. So as some of you may know, and as we discussed a few moments ago, there's a cap of £16,000 for making a claim for universal credit. Working tax credits and child tax credits are not means tested in the sort of sense that savings aren't taken into account. So what that means is, if you receive a migration notice on tax credits, you can make a claim for tax credits, and you can make a claim, sorry, for universal credit if you have more than £16,000 in savings. These will be ignored for the first 12 months of the claim. After 12 months, they would then start to impact on the claim. So if you have over £16,000 after a year, that would shut off your claim for universal credit. As a full-time student, you're generally not entitled to universal credit. Under legacy benefits, you were. So in this scenario, if you were a student receiving a legacy benefit, again, such as employment and support allowance or housing benefit, the fact that the regulations prevent you now from doing it would not prevent you sort of doing it on the basis that you were receiving a legacy benefit, if that makes sense. If you are receiving income support on the basis of incapacity for work, so that was the situation before employment and support allowance. People should have been migrated over from income support to employment and support allowance, I think by about 2013, 2013, 2014. There are still a few people around that still haven't migrated over somehow. But what that means is if you're invited to make a claim for universal credit on this basis, you would need to undergo a work capability assessment because that wouldn't have been undertaken under universal credit. So there'd be an expectation that you would be looking for work and doing everything you can, despite having this former sort of categorization that wouldn't follow you over automatically over onto universal credit. Any increase to universal credit, so any additional elements or any rent increases or any sort of up ratings in benefits erode the transitional protection over time, which will eventually reach naught. At that point, it will be cut off. Also, at the point of migration, if you are working, you will lose all of your transitional protection if for 3 consecutive assessment periods, so for 3 consecutive months, your earnings are less than what's called the minimum income floor. So that's typically £892 for a single person and 1,437 for a couple. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Okay, so here's a little stat about migration. So Child Poverty Action Group report that around about 27% of legacy benefits payments that are subject to managed migration had not claimed universal credit and still had their legacy benefits terminated, losing an average of £300 a month. And the reasons for that, I think, are quite apparent. So difficulties accessing internet, not knowing what information to provide. And that's why it's important to sort of reach out for support if you're invited to make a claim for universal credit. Anyone had any experience with the managed migration? Feel free to unmute and contribute. Okay, no problem. So we'll have a look at means tested benefits for pensioners quickly. So the main ones are pension credit. So there are 2 types of pension credit: guaranteed pension credit and savings credit. Guaranteed pension credit is for those in receipt of a low income, and savings credits are for those in sort of receipt of a moderate sort of savings in retirement. You can claim both sort of at the same time, or there can be an entitlement to one or the other. Again, it ensures that incomes are at a guaranteed level. And as I'm sure you're all aware, been a lot of publicity around pension credit recently around the winter fuel allowance. So even £1 of pension credit entitles you to the winter fuel allowance, but also things like full help with council tax, full housing benefit, and that sort of thing. So council tax support as well. This is one of the localized benefits that we've mentioned earlier, but I just thought I'd put it under means tested benefits. So support from the local authority, the help with council tax for those in receipt of low income. Every council around the country has their own scheme, so there isn't one sort of defined scheme. Some people may be entitled in one area to some help, while others in another area may not. It's always important to check the scheme in your local area from your local authority. Okay, so means tested benefits also act as what are called passporting benefits. So being in receipt of a means tested benefit opens up other avenues of kind of wider support that may be available to you. So examples of these are free prescriptions, as we mentioned just now, council tax support, winter fuel allowance, travel to hospital appointments, dental care, eye tests, that sort of thing. Okay. So we're going to move on now to non-means tested benefits. So essentially here we're looking at disability carer-based benefits. So main ones we're going to look at here, personal independence payment PIP for people between 16 and 67, attendance allowance for those pensionable age, disability living allowance for children up until the age of 16. For the purposes of tonight, we're just going to be focusing on PIP, just for time constraints. Okay, so PIP is a disability benefit which acknowledges that somebody has a disability or a health condition which impacts their ability to sort of carry out a number of their day-to-day tasks, and it also impacts on their mobility. It's a non-means tested benefit, which can be payable whether you're working or not working, and it's assessed on a scale, depending on where you fall on that scale as to the restrictions that you experience on a daily basis. And an award of PIP can lead to other entitlements as well, that we'll touch on a little bit later on. Okay, so some of you may be aware there are two components of PIP. There's, as we just said, there's the daily living component, which has two rates. There's the standard rate, which pays at 72.65 a week, and then the enhanced rate of 108.55 a week. And the mobility component pays £28.70 for the standard rate and 75.75 for the enhanced. You can receive an award for both, or just one, or an enhanced for one, a standard for other. So there's all different sort of permutations. Okay. So how to claim PIP? The sort of first point would be to make the initial claim on the telephone. It's the number there to do that. In some areas now, it is possible to make a new claim online. So if you wanted to have a look at that, pop your postcode into the PIP online system and it will tell you whether your area is accepting online claims. If not, you would need to telephone PIP to make a new claim. Off the back of that call, which is about 10 to 15 minutes, sort of just asking basic information, name, address, national insurance number, sort of basic information. That would then generate a medical questionnaire that would be sent out to you. Form gives you an opportunity to sort of let the decision maker know about the challenges that you have on a day-to-day basis, how these affect you, and an opportunity to supply medical evidence. And generally you have 1 month to return the form, although that can be extended if you're going to have difficulties returning that. So basic qualifying conditions for PIP, so as you've mentioned, need to be of working age, so between 16 and 67. Again, you need to have a recourse to public funds, so settled status or pre-settled status if you're an EEA national, or an indefinite leave to remain if you are a non-EEA national. You need to have been present in the UK for the last 104 out of the last 156 weeks. So that's called the past presence test. You need to have been, at the time of the application, you need to have been experiencing the sort of difficulties for 3 months before the date of the claim, with a reasonable expectation that they will continue for a further 9 months. And PIP cannot be paid as an inpatient in hospital. So you can make a claim whilst you're in hospital, but it won't pay for the periods that you are in hospital. So if you were to make a claim and it was awarded, it would only start being paid from when you were discharged. Okay. So points mean prizes. So PIP is assessed on a points-based system. You need a minimum of 8 points to qualify for the standard rate of both the daily living and the mobility part, and 12 points to qualify for an award of the enhanced on both. So these are the PIP descriptors for the daily living component. So we have preparing food, eating and drinking, medications, any difficulties with toileting, getting dressed, getting washed, any communication difficulties, reading, managing money, and mixing with other people. And then the mobility side, we have a descriptor called going out. So this is really looking at any difficulties that there would be sort of cognitively in going out. So that could be things like anxiety, or a cognitive difficulty, perhaps a learning difficulty that means that you would get lost if you weren't accompanied, that sort of thing. And then we have the mobility sort of the walking around element, which kind of says what it does on the tin. It looks at any difficulties that you would have with physically mobilizing. So sorry to get a bit legal here. So what is PIP assessing? So PIP is really assessing against all of these descriptors, any difficulties that you would have in completing those activities safely, to an acceptable standard, repeatedly, and within a reasonable time frame. So that's the sort of legal test for establishing whether there's an award of PIP or not. So if there's any increased risk of you undertaking an activity, if it's going to take you twice as long as it would a more able-bodied person, these are factors that can be taken into account when sort of assessing a PIP claim. So this is an example of an answer that one could give in terms of the getting washed component. Yeah, in a nutshell, this individual has a physical health condition. She struggles to bend down, and she needs help to do that, because if she didn't have it, there's a high risk that she could lose her balance and basically cause more injury to herself. So on the basis of that, you can make a case that she needs 2 points for that activity on the grounds that she needs sort of support. Hopefully that's clear. That's a bit rushed, but hopefully that's clear. Okay. So the next stage, after completing the form, it's highly likely that one would be invited to a medical assessment with an independent health professional contracted by the DWP. They will discuss the difficulties, sort of the issues that one has mentioned in the claim form, and then prepare a report which would go back to the DWP. DWP decision maker will analyze this information and anything else provided, any medical evidence, and anything else that's been provided in the course of the claim, and then use all of that information to make a decision. Decision notice is then posted out, and then if you're not happy with the decision, the normal appeal rights will apply. So typically, the first stage would be a mandatory reconsideration, when you would be asking the decision maker to look at the decision again, and then after that, then proceeding to appeal. PIP tends to be awarded for set periods of time, typically 2 to 3 years. There's no such thing as an indefinite award anymore, as there used to be under disability living allowance. Those with a long-standing health condition can receive a 10-year award. Yeah. So as we mentioned before, entitlement to PIP could mean the following. So eligibility for carers allowance. So if somebody is awarded the daily living rate of PIP, providing that conditions around carers allowance are met, there's a possibility that somebody could claim that, and we'll have a look at carers allowance in a while. Claim for PIP can increase other sort of legacy benefits. There are certain components that can be added. As we mentioned before, with the managed migration process, with the increase in tax credits, that's an example of where an additional amount could be added to a benefit, maximizing entitlement. If somebody was to be awarded the mobility rate, even at the standard rate, that gives an automatic entitlement to a blue badge and a bus pass, and there's potentially reduced exemption from road tax, and potentially, in the case of an enhanced award, a mobility vehicle. So carers allowance. So carers allowance, again, is what it says on the tin. It's really a benefit acknowledging that somebody is providing care to an individual who is kind of disabled and in receipt of a disability benefit. Need to be providing a minimum of 35 hours a week of care. Can work and claim carers allowance, although that is capped at £150 a week. That's due to increase in April to £180. So I think that's good. Don't have to live with the person. Caring can be a range of activities, could be phoning up, as well as sort of the physical care that one may expect. Depending on their circumstances, may be able to claim universal credit to top up their income. There may be exemptions from council tax, reductions in council tax. So there's other sort of areas that people in receipt of carers allowance may be able to access. So moving on to contributory benefits. So these are benefits which are based on national insurance contributions being up to date. Probably the best example that we would all think of would be the state pension. We all sort of build up a national insurance record over time in the hope that we will receive a state pension at the end of it. But in terms of sickness benefits, let's say, the main one that we'll look at tonight will be something called New Style Employment and Support Allowance, which typically used to be called contributions-based employment and support allowance. So yeah, looking at New Style Employment and Support Allowance, and this is where we're going to look into some more depth as well at the work capability assessment. So New Style Employment and Support Allowance is the benefit one can claim if they're unable to work due to a disability or a health condition. Need to have paid or been credited with national insurance in the last 2 years before the year of the claim. So for now, you would need to have full years for 22, 23 and 23, 24. It's not means tested. We'll need to undergo the work capability assessment. Working age benefit, so you can't claim past pension age. If you had a live claim for New Style Employment and Support Allowance, typically it would cut off at pension age if you made your claim for your state pension at that point. Although it could continue if you decided to defer. But typically it would cut off at pension age. And the process to make the claim is here. The website's there. So in terms of the work capability assessment, it's the test which ensures, which sort of examines somebody's capability to work. So there are 3 outcomes. There's the fit for work, so have an assessment. The decision maker isn't satisfied that there's any restrictions on a person working. So they'll be thrown off their claim for ESA, and they'll probably have to make a claim for universal credit and sort of engage with the job centre around looking for work. There's the limited capability for work decision, which would mean that there's an acknowledgement that there is a health condition there and there is a restriction in work, but there would be no obligation for a person to look for work, but they would have to sort of think about getting ready for work. So engaging in courses, getting a CV ready, sort of getting more job ready. But as I say, no expectation of looking for a job at this stage. And then the last one is limited capability for work-related activity. So this one is where there is no sort of conditionality or claimant commitment needed. Decision maker has acknowledged that someone has a health condition and they're just not ready to sort of engage in any work or any work-related activity, and they're nowhere near sort of job ready, and they would just sort of be left alone. So after making a claim for employment and support allowance, and also the medical route of universal credit, a medical questionnaire would then be issued. So in order to start the medical route for both ESA and universal credit, you would need to obtain a medical fit note from your GP or any other healthcare professional. Get that sent in. That would then generate the medical questionnaire, which would be sent out to you. Similarly to PIP, it assesses a number of sort of descriptors around mental health issues, cognitive issues, and physical issues, and how these restrict you on a daily basis. So this is an example of what the capability for work questionnaire looks like. Don't know whether it's familiar to anyone. Okay. So this is one of the sort of descriptors that it looks at. So learning how to do new tasks. So this is a more sort of cognitive descriptor, and one that we're going to have a look at in some more depth in a minute. So these are the cognitive descriptors that ESA looks at. So learning how to do new tasks, awareness of hazards of danger, starting and finishing tasks, coping with changes, going out, coping in social situations, behaving appropriately, and eating and drinking. And then the physical activities, mobilizing, standing and sitting, reaching, picking up and moving things, manual dexterity, any issues with communication, both hearing, reading, speaking, typing, getting around safely, so that's more visual impairments, any incontinence issues, any issues with blacking out, and there's also the eating and drinking, sort of the more physical side of things as well. Okay, so the work capability assessment. So off the back of sending in your medical questionnaire, and any supporting evidence that there may be, you'll be invited to an assessment. Similarly to PIP, it's on a points-based system. You need to score 15 points to be classed as having limited capability for work-related activity. There are certain descriptors that give you that, and we'll have a look at one of those in a second. If you don't qualify for the sort of top descriptors, if you get an accumulation of 15 points, that gives you the limited capability for work classification. Okay. So this is an example of learning tasks and the specific descriptor around limited capability for work-related activity. So cannot learn how to complete a simple task such as setting an alarm clock due to cognitive impairment or mental disorder. I don't think that that's particularly helpful in assessing one's ability to learn tasks at work, but it is what it is. So this is an example of how I would sort of tackle this descriptor based on somebody with perhaps a mental health condition or a cognitive impairment. So issues with concentration, would find it difficult to learn new skills, difficulty balancing conflicting priorities in a workplace, and in effect, it would mean that she would struggle to maintain a job, and then it would sort of cause a decline in her mental health or that sort of thing. Hopefully that's clear in a nutshell. These will all be available anyway, so feel free to have a look. Okay, so we've mentioned the three outcomes. Limited capability for work, so that's the component where you sort of need to get job ready. Under ESA, that classification would only last for 1 year. Under limited capability for work-related activity, that can be paid indefinitely. Under universal credit, they're both sort of indefinite until you're called to reassessment. But under ESA, limited capability for work is only time limited to 1 year. So with employment and support allowance, there's also a scheme called permitted work. So as we've mentioned, ESA is a benefit acknowledging that you can't work because of a disability or a health condition. But there is a scheme called permitted work, which enables anybody in receipt of ESA to try out work up to a limit, just to sort of try it out, see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't affect your benefits. And also, whilst you're doing this permitted work, it doesn't affect any benefits as well. So the basic sort of qualifying condition for this is that you can work up to, but no more than 16 hours a week, earning less than £183.50 a week. If you were to do that, it would have no effect on your benefits. You can pull out of it at any time, but you do need to let ESA know that you are engaging in permitted work. Touching on local support, so we've already touched upon local on council tax reduction, which is administered by local authorities. There's also things like discretionary housing payments. So anybody that's in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit with the rent element, and there's a shortfall, perhaps due to a benefit cap or a bedroom tax or a non-dependent deduction or any other shortfall between their housing benefit and their actual rent, there's support from the local authority potentially in the short term to help with that shortfall on the proviso that you're taking active steps to sort of improve the situation. So that could be looking at downsizing, looking at increasing your income through benefits, looking at increasing your hours at work. As it says in the title, it's discretionary. So there's no sort of statutory sort of grounds for awarding or not awarding. The basic condition is that you need to be in receipt of help with your rent, and there needs to be a shortfall. A number of local authorities do offer hardship payments for their most vulnerable residents. So that could be things like vouchers for white goods, emergency loans, that sort of thing. So these are really my top tips for making a claim, particularly around disability-based benefits. So carefully consider how you are on a daily basis and how you are for the majority of the time. I know that people will often mention or say that there's a bad day. So it's not strictly true. What we're really looking at is how things are for the majority of the time. So if you're having bad days for more than 50% of the time, so say 4 out of 7 days of a week, that's the sort of line that we need to be thinking about. Issues such as fatigue, anxiety, pain, breathlessness are just some of the real issues that I think are important to consider when making a claim. Gather as much medical evidence as possible, both in terms of clinical evidence, and witness statements from family members can be helpful as well. And if not sure of anything, feel free to contact us. Some helpful contacts.